the Aiden Rosses of the world. A lot of these guys are right adjacent, maybe. They organically found themselves in this space, and I think the Republican Party took advantage of that very well. That same ecosystem doesn't exist on the left. It's not necessarily flooding the market with like a bunch of liberals, like, oh, if we had like 8 more Pod Save Americas that kind of look like me, for example, like more bro-y, right, then that would be fine. It's like, no, you can't podcast your way out of this problem.
I think if you looked at all my positions, I think way more of them are left-wing than right-wing. They do it on the left, they do it on the right. They gaslight you, they manipulate you, they promote narratives.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
He reposted it. I thought you meant repost on story, but like the feeder. I will vote for Donald Trump.
People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
Republican Party lost because it's not conservative.
I did DMT 3 times in a day.
Wow.
The left needs a Joe Rogan.
Yeah. I don't think that the Democratic Party can podcast itself out of this issue. Joe Rogan, he endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2020. Maybe they should do an autopsy on why he left the party.
The Democratic Party needs you, yes, you, to be the Joe Rogan of the left. What does that mean? I don't even think they know. They want someone to be as popular as Joe Rogan, but to agree with all of their most unpopular stances. If you have popular momentum as a party figure, if you're Zohran Mamdani, well, you know, you're probably a socialist. So sorry, you can't be a Joe Rogan of the left. We didn't mean that kind of left. We meant continuing the managed decline of the United States, destroying the Middle East, and refusing to make people's lives better, but slowly and less spitefully than Republicans.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
I suppose, by the Joe Rogan of the left, the Democrats actually just want Pod Save America to be as popular as Joe Rogan. But there's a reason that they're not. And there's a reason any search for a Joe Rogan of the left will inevitably fail. Because to get people excited about left-wing politics, you need to meet them where they're at. And the Democrats just aren't ready for that. Because the politics that will animate people, and is animating people,
People are aroused.
the politics that will get them enthused and listening and ready to fight and go out and tell people to vote, knocking on doors, are the politics of Zohran Mamdani, not of John Fetterman.
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr. Mamdani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel as mayor?
I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples, or at their homes, or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
In the words of someone who will be coming up later as one of the people put forward as a possible left Joe Rogan,
You can't podcast your way out of this problem.
people aren't unenthused about the Democratic Party simply because they didn't have enough podcast appearances. They're turned off by the Democratic Party because the party, crippled by gerontocracy and a stubborn old guard addicted to lobbyist bribes and Bill Clinton-era neoliberalism, is not offering them anything to improve their gradually worsening lives. The Democrats don't need spokespeople, at least not on their own. They need actual popular policy.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
But then, why is the Democratic Party so obsessed with finding a Joe Rogan figure who will endorse them in the same way that Joe Rogan himself endorsed Donald Trump? Do figures like this that could actually help exist? And if they do, which they kind of do-ish, why does the Democratic Party, time and time again, refuse to listen to them?
I will ensure America always has the strongest, most lethal fighting force in the world.
What the fuck?
I, Bridget Empire, science and culture correspondent for Red Coat newspaper The Daily Telegraph, am here to talk about just that. Starting with the question, why are we even talking about Joe fucking Rogan?
I
I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelp Boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Vaughn, Bussin' with the Boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan. And thank you, America. Thank you. Have a good night.
Ever since millionaire podcast stalk Joe Rogan endorsed Donald Trump on his podcast and was singled out by the campaign as one of the reasons for the subsequent Trump victory in the 2024 US presidential election, Democrats have been running around like headless chickens, telling every person within squawking distance with a keyboard, a microphone, or a pen that what we need to reverse the fortunes of the United States is a Joe Rogan of the left. There are several ways in which this is wrong. Firstly, part of Joe Rogan's original appeal was that he was not overtly political. This has certainly changed in recent years, especially post-COVID, but Joe Rogan's appeal to people that liked him was a dumb guy who asked people from all walks of life a million different questions and always just agreed with the last thing anyone said to him. He was a uniquely impressionable man. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a bit spiteful he's been transphobic for basically his whole career. In fact, some might call him God's perfect oaf. I'm calling him that. In fact, you could make the argument that the Joe Rogan of the left was, at some point, if you discount some of his opinions, such as the trans stuff, Joe Rogan himself. I wouldn't agree with that, necessarily, or at all. But remember, we're talking about his appeal to lay people, not to people who've read Marx or know what dialectical materialism is. Despite his horrendous opinions on people like me, his plethora of outright far-right guests, and his anti-vaccine tendencies which exploded into full-on science denial after the pandemic, he did at one point endorse Bernie Sanders for president.
What Bernie stands for is a guy who, well, look, you could dig up dirt on every single human being that's ever existed if you catch them in their worst moment and you magnify those moments and you cut out everything else and you only display those worst moments. That said, you can't find very many with Bernie. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life. And that, in and of itself, is a very powerful structure to operate from.
Who are you going to vote for in the primary?
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because I think Bernie and Tulsi together would be a fucking devastating combination. I really do.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
Do I think he was, at that point, the Joe Rogan of the left? No, because he was not of the left. Far from it. In fact, I was always most familiar with Joe Rogan for inviting on a series of Daily Wire hosts, outright fascists, and Jordan Peterson on way more than anyone left-wing. But again, we're talking about how normies see him, how your co-workers see him. And despite how much most of us would like more people to notice when someone's being anti-trans and anti-vaccine, part of his appeal, and part of why he's losing some of his appeal now, is much more overtly in the MAGA camp, to the point of losing out in the podcast rankings to the liberals at the Midas Touch podcast, was because he was seen by much of his audience as an everyman. You could attach yourself to him and assume he had your opinions. You could think of him as just one of your friends, because he speaks like a lot of people's friends, or at least acquaintances. And this sort of only worked because he has the ideological consistency of Azealia Banks. Again, God's perfect oath. But even God's perfect oath is still, at the end of the day, an oath. And that oath did drift further to the right during the pandemic, keeping and entrenching his reactionary takes and shedding any sympathies he might have occasionally had with the social democratic left, your Bernie Sanders types.
My people feel like they're in danger, like they're being criminalized.
Oh,
we are, we're being pushed out of society. We're being told we don't exist. And then, of course, you have to say you're an ally of the LGBTQ+.
You have to be an ally.
They're digging their heels in on all that stuff, though, which is that's not going to win anymore. That's too crazy.
So when people talk about a Joe Rogan of the left, do they mean someone with Joe Rogan's demeanor, but on the left? Well, also no. Because when Democrats say this, they don't mean someone on the left. They mean someone that toes the Democrat Party line. And that's not likable. Those aren't popular positions. You'll never be able to make the interchangeable white men all named John from Pod Save America as popular as Joe Rogan, because they fundamentally appeal to people who already agree with the Democratic Party. Instead, if you want to get more people on side, You have to be able to speak to people where they're at and lead them towards better politics. But Democrats don't want them to be led to better politics. They don't want people to end up listening to, say, Hasan Piker or Caroline Kwan or anyone on the left. They constantly make clear that a large percentage of the party leadership considers the left as much of an enemy as the right. The Democrats will happily endorse the most frothing at the mouth right-wing Democrats, but Zohran Mamdani is a bridge too far. In terms of potential Joe Rogans, think of Hasan Piker getting booted from the Democratic National Convention on camera.
He looks terrified. It's fine. It's just like we're getting booted. We're getting booted from this space. We're fine. We're fine for now. In this, we're not fine for now. We're literally we're permanently done here, bro. That's so whack.
And that is an example, but I think perhaps the most instructive example of the real attitude of the Democrats to anyone you might genuinely consider a contender for the title of Joe Rogan of the left is the phenomenon of the Bernie bro.
I want to talk about the Bernie bros. The one thing that connects women on the left and women on the right, I have found at least a lot of guest hosts, a lot of guests that have come on over the 3 years I've been here, is the abuse that we have all been subjected to by Bernie bros. It is by far, of anything I've ever done in my entire life, the most violent, the most misogynistic, the most sexist, the most harmful. My mother has cried over doctored photos Bernie brothers have sent me, and I'm just one story. He has a real problem.
Largely used as a smear by the more centrist arm of the Democratic Party, during Bernie's run to be leader of the Democratic Party, he was constantly held responsible for the behaviour of every one of his fans, perceived to be misogynistic, impolite, and vulgar by those spreading this term. In reality, the people you attract, no matter how unconventional they might be, do not necessarily reflect on a candidate. Bernie invoked passion in a lot of people who'd never been excited about politics before, because he gave them hope. Some of them, sure, had some issues to work out, and some probably bad opinions. Some of them were genuinely harmful. But his fans had this diversity of opinion because there were a lot of fans. Because when a politician is popular, there are going to be some weirdos that like him.
We also know the amount of anonymous activity that happens on the internet, and that simply is difficult. It is difficult to control. When you have like a Twitter handle with a bunch of numbers on it with 2 followers that are lobbying vitriol at you, we don't know where that comes from, but I know that it doesn't think he's done enough.
If the Democrats cared about popularity, they would have embraced the man. But they didn't. They used the behaviour of a small percentage of his fan base to smear him, while at the same time, they turned their ire to what they saw as a fringe, radical, and inappropriate genre of fan. Those with their own podcasts and popular social media accounts that embrace an ironic and sometimes vulgar tone in the name of promoting socialism. That last part was the real problem Democrats had with this, however. The socialism. Not the vulgarity or the rudeness or the sexism or whatever they said their problems actually were with Bernie bros. But the socialism. And they weren't honest about this, for probably smart reasons. And they presented the problem as one of tone policing. This was the first generation of the real Joe Rogans of the left. Not as in they would have actually worked as Joe Rogans of the left, but as in they are people who are accessible, funny, and lack the stiffness and dedication to politeness and towing the party line of your Pod Save Americas. Because when Democrats ask where the Joe Rogans of the left are, I think the answer is pretty simple. You ostracized them and denounced them. And frankly, they don't like you much either, because the real left answer to Joe Rogan came long before this discussion was ever had in the halls of the DNC. And it was called the dirtbag left.
I was hoping the next Mecha Hitler would be from Africa.
What did you say that's anti-Semitic?
They not like us.
My penis is none of your business.
Who the fuck is Ethan Klein?
He's like Mr. Skin for Hasan.
We were all watching the war and it got overwhelming. I cried and my girlfriend was like, "What's wrong?" And I said, like they could like Hezbollah could get involved. My girlfriend was like, "Oh, that's just a little guy." And now people think I'm pro-Israel.
If you wanted to come up with a Joe Rogan of the left, you could do much worse than any of the shows that came up with, welcomed, or even were just painted with that label. Except the one of them which turned out to just be a bunch of clout-chasing right-wingers.
You guys are racist or something? What's going on there?
Yeah, we're right-wing now.
Right-wing.
Regardless, what Joe Rogan provides is relatability, lack of care for politeness and formality, and the feeling that you are talking to a friend, getting to know his opinions and how he thinks, through the way he talks to those he's interviewing, through his own jokes and his rants, And that is the makings of a parasocial relationship, which, for those who don't have a well thought out politics of their own, can genuinely sway votes. If you don't know what to think about politics, if you're too busy working all day to think about these things, even though they deeply affect you, as they do all of us, when someone you feel like you know and trust, even though you don't actually know them, endorses someone, that could potentially sway you. But for this to work, the voice has to not just put up a front of authenticity, but be genuinely authentic. And that often means being controversial, because you're not filtering out what you think and what you say. And this style comes to the posting, podcasting, and wider sphere of what we call the dirtbag left through an unlikely source, that being conservative talk radio, and the man who made it so widespread among the Christian right, so notorious and so dangerous.
There's a man out here who's coming on later as a guest who claims that you were a communist trained in Ghana.
The white race has probably had fewer slaves and for a briefer period of time than any other in the history of the world.
Then why did you say, sir, and these are your words, American Negroes have no choice but to seek the overthrow of the U.S. government if they cannot win equality under it?
They have been training young black kids to hate this country. And they trained their parents before that to hate this country.
American radio in the 1940s was known for being formal and polite. That is, until the boundaries of how much of your personality you can show and how much button pushing you can get away with was pushed beyond the remit of a mere DJ. The person now known as the first shock jock started, according to NPR, by interjecting between songs with his opinions on current events and rants about politics, until eventually the songs took a back seat to the opinions. Opinionated, controversial, and abrasive to a fault. He developed his first call-in show in Delaware in 1951. His name was Joe Pine. Like the generations of shock jocks and those that owe their livelihoods to the space that shock jocks opened up, from Rush Limbaugh to Joe Rogan, Pine's success rode the wave of backlash to a perceived progressiveness in politics that he, and the right wing of America, absolutely despised. As a former colleague put it, "This was the era of the hippies and free love and all that, which Pine was absolutely opposed to. He was sort of a darling of right-wing conservatives." The DNA of this style of radio is all over the conservative podcast circuit, and the proliferation of far-right talk radio shows that sit neatly in the midpoint of Joe Pine's era and the modern Jim Bro conservative podcasts. And like Joe Rogan, Pine liked to bring on a wide array of guests, from all backgrounds, including those you might argue should not have been allowed to platform at all. From communists and atheists, to Scientologists, to snake charmers, to members of the KKK and the John Birch Society. Of course, his audience was right-wing, and he was right-wing. So you can imagine from that list of guests, which left more of a lasting impression. And the far right certainly learned lessons in communication from Joe Pine, to the point where the term shock jock, rather than making you necessarily think of Joe Pine, is almost synonymous with another infamous conservative radio host, one Rush Limbaugh.
Obama does have slave blood.
Girl, prison, honey.
Without Rush Limbaugh, there is no Daily Wire. Without Rush Limbaugh, there is no InfoWars. Rush Limbaugh was an extremely popular figure on the right, and had many imitators in talk radio and elsewhere. He's credited with popularizing the term feminazis, was an early anti-abortion crusader, and paved the way for men from Alex Jones to Joe Rogan with his insistence on a combination of pseudoscience and conspiracism. He was a climate denier, an evolution denier, spread the birther conspiracy theory, rallied against civil rights, insinuated that all black people are criminals, claimed the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the Christchurch shooting were false flag operations carried out by leftists, and ran a segment called AIDS Update, where he mocked gay people dying of the disease. Rush Limbaugh was a horrific human being, and the world is much better off for him no longer being in it. But he did popularize the shock jock style of radio, and showed how it could be used for political aims to great effect. He did change the views of many people in the country. The success of right-wing figures up to and including Donald Trump is in no small part thanks to the radicalizing effect of Rush Limbaugh and his many imitators. But if this style can be used to spread right-wing politics, what's to stop it being used to spread left-wing politics? Well, the answer to that is money and a platform, which is why podcasting was a golden opportunity to change the type of politics that was possible in this style of show. In the age of the internet, anyone could pick up a mic and make a show that people around the world could listen to. You didn't need approval from radio stations, you didn't need startup capital, you didn't risk being hounded out of your studio by the remnants of McCarthyism in America. You could do it yourself. And if you did it right, and people were interested, you could find an audience. And left-wing shock jock podcasts absolutely did.
I've read two different things, one in the New York Times, one disappointingly in Jacobin in the past week, that were like, we have to build a new masculinity. Was it, we can't get the bro vote. And it's like, you spend 8 years calling someone a racist reactionary, and like 21-year-old men when they're most full of beans? Like, there is something wrong with masculinity, but it seems like they'll do anything they can to avoid, maybe housing should be affordable. Maybe there should be a jobs program. Both articles were like, it's not going to work to put in economic programs alone. It's like, well, why don't you try it? And then we'll decide.
Why don't you?
Before we write it off, why don't you just try
this thing that we've never tried ever? It's not going to work, so we shouldn't even try it.
They don't also
give me a fucking break.
Even court them. Oh, they're notoriously hard to get. Like, they've tried.
The dirtbag left is a term coined by Chapo Trap House co-host Amber Frost to describe, Chapo Trap House, and shows with similar styles. As Frost herself wrote in Current Affairs, while vulgarity isn't inherently subversive, it can help tarnish the unearned prestige of the powerful, something that many Democrats, as well as Republicans, hunger to do. We can either reclaim vulgarity from the Trumps of the world, or find ourselves handicapped by civility. The show that set the template for what would become a larger umbrella of the dirtbag left was, of course, Chapo Trap House, a leftist political comedy podcast that broke from other left-leaning podcasts of the time by being, actually on the left, instead of holding up Obama as the furthest leftward edge of the Overton window, but mostly for being vulgar. Talking like people you know talk, like your friends talk, like your co-workers talk, not being careful about what you can or cannot say, and using crassness and ridicule when it is deserved and or funny, as well as some regrettable usage of slurs. You can also count on the Dirtbag Left Sphere podcasts like though they definitely were much more comedy-focused than political, newer podcasts such as TrueAnon, and many more, even inspiring similar shows in different countries, such as Real Politic and Trash Future in the UK.
You could ask my wife if I'm gay, and she would say no. And for that reason, I would be more than happy to drink from the puddle, and I would be fine.
Now, this sort of thing does sometimes land you in hot water, and it's not like Chapo never did anything that might have turned off a listener or 10, such as the somewhat liberal use of slurs and some transphobia in the early days, which for some apparently was a breath of fresh air, and for me just seemed edgy for the sake of edge. Regardless of whether you can move past that, however, you can't deny their success. What started as a joint appearance between Felix Biederman, Will Menaker, and Matt Crispin on Street Fight Radio soon became the most popular podcast on Patreon, earning at one point, according to The New Yorker, nearly $22,000 a month, and at a time that the left weren't necessarily ascendant. But the combination of socialist politics with a shock jock style delivery and lack of regard for civility, in an age when places like YouTube are wall-to-wall conservative grifters, and perhaps, in the light of 8 years of Obama, a worrying amount of people, fed up with the status quo, were turning to the far right. And Chapo and shows like it were somewhat of an antidote to some that may have fallen down that pipeline, or instead fall into cynicism. Does that sound familiar? Well, after 4 years of the Biden administration killed a lot of people's hope and optimism.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
And by people, I mean those who for some reason thought that Biden was at all representative of the left. The far right, once again relevant now Trump wasn't in office, making it clear how fucking insane their ideology was, were on the rise in a big way. Chapo was still around, though one of their co-hosts left the show and was later revealed to be, well, I won't say it on here, but there's a reason people to this day are still asking Brianna Joy Gray what happened to Virgil.
Hey, you know they got your mans.
And split up, much to the horror of every left-wing white man you know. Red Scare turned out to be fascist somehow. To be honest, I didn't even know who they were before they started getting buddy-buddy with Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones, so is that a surprise? I doubt it. Let's just call them grifters and move on.
You guys are racist or something? What's going on there?
Yeah, we're right wing now.
Right wing.
TrueAnon took off, and a lot of other podcasts, and we had the rise of someone under the dirtbag umbrella by extension, if not in spirit. Friends and collaborators with the hosts of Chapo and TrueAnon, and arguably the most prominent leftist during the latest far-right surge, Hasan Piker.
We're getting booted. So you're like, I'm out. Fuck this. I'm not voting for these dipshits. Okay, the racists are not gonna like that one. Gavin Newsom started his own podcast. It feels like the Democrats kept asking the question, like, who's the Joe Rogan of the left? And then instead of hearing my answer to it, which was, you can't podcast your way out of this problem, they decided, oh, shut the fuck up. We just need to be the Joe Rogan of the left ourselves.
Hasan, formerly of the Young Turks, and now the second biggest political commentator on Twitch, losing out on first place to our denying pro climbing wall for cockroaches.
Get the dead rat out. I don't need to anymore. It doesn't smell bad.
Streams pretty much every day for as long as most of us work at our day jobs. I would argue he's, if anything, less vulgar than Chapo was back in the day, but Chapo himself has gone less intentionally abrasive in recent years too. And as another leftist in their 30s who grew up on South Park, listen, I get it, I can relate, but Hasan's stream is a rallying point for a lot of people who feel lost in the wake of Trump's return to office. And before that, looking for an actual left alternative while a Democratic president actively arms and gives permission for a And once again, much like Chapo got a bunch of profiles written about them around the time that Trump became president for the first time, as outlets scrambled to find out how they got popular and if they could emulate it while being much further to the right, being pro-corporate, pro-democratic party, and pro-towing the line at all costs. The answer was no. A lot of outlets have, in the last 6 months, been profiling Hasan Piker and asking, could he be the Joe Rogan of the left? And I say, they're asking entirely the wrong question. Hasan is not the Joe Rogan of the left. Hasan is the face of the dirtbag left in the post-Biden world. Except, I don't even necessarily think that he fits that mold. He's more serious, less vulgar, partially because he's already been banned from Twitch a bunch of times for not watching his words. And even then, while the dirtbag left does have its similarities with Joe Rogan, it's only as far as that they are accessible due to their rhetorical style, or rather lack thereof, their lack of filter, and their willingness to be crass and not pull their punches. What people are really looking for when they look for a Joe Rogan of the left is a shock jock, but for the Democratic Party. And that's absolutely impossible, because no shock jock would toe the party line. That's the whole point of a shock jock. If you want that, if you want someone with the popularity of a Joe Rogan experience, or even a Hasan Piker or a Chapo Trap House, you need to be okay with them being honest, being critical, perhaps being a brand risk. Because without that honesty, you aren't getting anywhere near that level of popularity. And you're not giving the space necessary to allow that shock jock style.
Yeah, I am being patronizing. I don't know who the fuck you are, and you're over here chirping all the way from fucking London about Palestine.
Part of this is precisely why the most famous shock jocks are rabid conservatives, constantly denigrating people and smearing others, often unjustly, always to provoke anger from their audience and get them to feel like they know the host, and that they need to do something about these people that their favourite shock jock is mad at. But while the origins of the shock jock do skew very conservative, that's not a core part of the DNA necessarily. It's merely a style of presentation, and its evolution into the 21st century has brought us many varieties of content creator that, willingly or not, are influenced by those that came before. The ancestral shock jock is in the DNA of, yes, Joe Rogan and his fellow travelers such as Ben Shapiro and the other ghouls of the Daily Wire, but also in Chapo Trap House and a lot of streamers. And this is part of the reason why the Democrats cannot have their own Joe Rogan. They do not care for left-wing politics. Even breaking the party line in order to advocate for Palestine can get you in the Democratic Party's bad books. Hasan Piker, for example, was kicked out of the DNC partially for this very reason. When people after the election looked at Hasan and asked if he could be the Joe Rogan of the left. This is a pretty clear example of why that might not fly. An actual Joe Rogan of the left, not the left of the Democratic Party, already exists, and Hasan is not a part of that. But there are a legion of shows and channels and comedians who do fit that mold and have done it for years. But the Democratic Party did not and will not embrace them, unless it completely shifts its priorities and attitude towards its voter base and those to the left of its voter base. You can't convince people bad policy is popular by having a bunch of podcasters tell them so. You need to meet voters where they're at. Offer them policies that will actually improve their lives. Not have your platform governed by lobbyists and a rapidly aging cohort of party elites whose politics are stuck in the early 1990s.
We won't rest! We won't rest!
And they don't just refuse to do this with media that could potentially help them if they made concessions to the left. They refuse to budge even in response to the most tepid attempts to give the party itself a fresh face, from their elected leaders and even appointed leaders, like we saw recently with mass shooting survivor turned Democratic Party activist David Hogg, who went from a promising up-and-comer, potentially being groomed for power, to biting critic of the party elite, after advocating for replacing Democratic representatives that are older than the State of Israel with some fresh faces. He was removed for this. The Democratic Party is not only not interested in listening to the public, but it's not even interested in listening to its most dedicated activists. The machine absolutely refuses to listen if it means that it can't play Weekend at Bernie's with senators anymore.
Frail and wheelchair-bound, these are some of the last images of Senator Dianne Feinstein. At 90, she was the oldest sitting U.S. senator, working till the end.
The Republicans do not have this problem, and that is a dangerous place to be in. We have an increasingly extreme far-right party as one of the two options in America, if there is even another election, versus a nominally left-wing party that in reality is centre-right at best and refuses to budge even slightly to accommodate the changing attitudes of voters and the desperate needs of the populace. The Democrats have, on occasion, accused Pod Save America, a podcast of literal former Obama staffers, of being too far left and too critical. Meanwhile, the right is increasingly embracing people up to and including Alex Jones. Do we need an Alex Jones to the left? Do you see how silly this whole thing sounds when you put it like that?
Now, there it is, the gay bomb. Look it up for yourself. I mean, this is what they're... What do you think tap water is? It's a gay bomb, baby.
Looking for a Joe Rogan of the left is, to put it politely, silly. Joe Rogan is just a guy. He doesn't have some sort of magic sauce. He's a dumb guy in a chair that used to be popular for other reasons which gave him massive name recognition, now talking to anyone he can, but mainly conservatives and those to his right, about stuff he doesn't understand for multiple hours. Joe Rogan endorsing Donald Trump probably helped Trump, but that effect would have been negligible if Democrats had actually been offering anything to persuade people who are on the fence or people who don't usually vote to vote for them. When you are standing for nothing, saying you'll do absolutely nothing different than what your extremely unpopular predecessor did, you're gonna have a hard time getting people out to vote who aren't already ride or die for your party. Democrats spent the Kamala Harris campaign getting celebrities out left and right. Freaking Beyonce was out there performing for Kamala Harris. But no matter how many celebrities endorse you, if you are saying loudly that you're gonna suck shit, and you refuse to offer anything that will actually improve people's lives, or if you do, your messaging on it is non-existent, you leave yourself very vulnerable. Vulnerable enough, apparently, that you can take major damage from one of the dumbest human beings to ever hold a microphone telling his audience that they should vote for a literal fascist. You should not have that problem. And that problem would be much smaller if you were, actually trying to improve people's lives, instead of doing what Kamala Harris was doing and promising to have the most lethal army in the history of the country, cozying up with the Cheneys, saying she would do nothing different to Joe Biden while he enables and is complicit in a and refusing to take the easy win by pissing off her donors and advocating for Medicare for all, like she did when Bernie was pushing for it and she copied him because it was clear it was popular. And it's clear that the current cabal of barely alive old white men running the DNC are not genuinely looking for anything like what they would need in their Joe Rogan of the left figure. The establishment at the Democratic Party are firmly the party of Bill Clinton, of third-way neoliberalism, being tough on crime, and sitting on huge piles of lobbyist money like 100 gold-stick dragons, fat on the exploitation of the working class, but always hungry for more. And even beyond that, the brains of half of these people, if and when they are still working, are firmly stuck in the Cold War. The idea of giving any leeway to a socialist, to them, is unthinkable. Even the podjohns are too much for them. They're seen as too left-wing for the DNC higher-ups, and they're literally part of the Democratic establishment. They're literally former Obama staffers. David Hogg, not someone most would consider even slightly far left, was ran out of the party leadership with torches and pitchforks for daring to suggest some younger blood replace the more Nosferatu-looking members of the House and Senate. And despite having spent months crying out that they need to find some young, fresh face to make them popular again, when one comes along in the form of New York mayoral candidate Zoran Mandani, half the party refused to endorse him in an unprecedented level of hesitation from the very same people that brought you Vote Blue no matter who. And the other half are on TV claiming he's calling for global jihad.
They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad.
The people at the top of the DNC clearly seem to care more about getting their millions in corporate bribes and keeping the Overton window from ever moving further left than Ronald Reagan, that they are more than happy to abandon any candidate with a Democratic nomination if they catch a whiff of socialism, or even just a wish to reform the corrupt and immovable, ossified leadership of the so-called party of the left. And this extends to client journalists too. The New York Times, for instance, claimed the anti-establishment momentum that brought Zohran Mamdani his shock victory in the New York mayor primary was over, because the progressive candidate won in Arizona's 7th congressional district? This story was just barefaced manipulation, painting a young but less progressive candidate as the Zoran equivalent in the race, despite the same people and groups that endorsed Mamdani endorsing the candidate who, in the end, won. This is not an organization or a media ecosystem that will allow for an actual left alternative to the alternative media circuit that Joe Rogan exemplifies to form without smearing it worse than Jeremy Corbyn or indeed Zoran Mamdani. Because this is not a progressive organization. Despite the hopes and wishes of many of its candidates, and certainly its members, and more so, its voters. In fact, the political instincts at the top of the Democratic Party are so bad and so out of touch from the general public, and even registered and loyal Democrat voters and volunteers, that their idea of a Joe Rogan of the left now is Jamie Harrison, the former Democratic Party chair, and his podcast, catchily titled At Our Table, hosted by a man 99.99% of the American population have never heard of. This podcast will almost certainly be a massive flop, and from its viewing figures so far, it's already there. What are we even doing here, lads? They even talk in the Semaphore interview with Harrison about this podcast, about how Kamala should have been doing more podcasts, as if that was the problem here, as if 500 more Call Her Daddy appearances would have made her decision to leave no daylight between her and Biden, as Biden himself demanded of her, somehow super popular. Everyone knows promising to do exactly the same thing as a record-breakingly unpopular politician is exactly how you win votes. That and going on a bunch of incredibly popular podcasts that just so happen to be not for Republicans and also not for anyone to the left of the people that brought you the '94 crime bill.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel.
So when you're looking for a Joe Rogan of the left, you're looking for an influential and authentic figure who can funnel votes to your candidate because he clearly believes in your cause and thinks you will deliver, and because his audience trusts him to be authentic and truly having their best interests at heart. This entirely because they parasocial relationship their way into their brains thinking that this Joe Rogan figure is their friend. To do that, you actually need to believe in something. You could, I imagine, get Hasan Piker on board for this. He said himself he wants to be regime-pilled. But to do that, you'd actually have to be offering an actual left alternative. Without that, what do you want people to do? Lie and say they're excited for tax cuts for billionaires and $2 billion more a month to the IDF? The point is authenticity. This isn't going to work. People can tell when someone is genuinely excited about a candidate or a party. You can't solve this problem with comms. You can't flood the zone with podcasts and expect to win. You need to change your policies so people believe that you will actually improve their lives. Get people excited. Give them what they want, and then go even further. You need to change your platform. It's that simple. Without that, you go nowhere. You think Joe Rogan endorsing Mitt Romney would have hit the same? No. Trump is a monster, but he's a monster that feeds on the darkest instincts of his base. and the ignorance of the wider public on what will actually help them. It's not hard to beat him at this game. That is, if you genuinely offer people an alternative. People are desperate. Desperate enough that a healthcare CEO meeting his end was celebrated and cheered on. Clearly, people are not happy with the way things are. Socialized medicine would fill that void. It would solve problems for millions. All you have to do to win is support an overwhelmingly popular policy, and it'll get you over the line. And I'm sure every Joe Rogan of the left, every dirtbag leftist would vote for you and encourage people to vote for you if it meant healthcare for all. The only thing you'd lose is the backing of health industry lobbyists. And if that means more to you than the lives of millions of people suffering in your country, is it any wonder that you couldn't win? The problems in the Democratic Party go way deeper than which oaf with a microphone endorsed you this cycle. This is endemic. And as long as it goes unsolved, you will never be popular, no matter how many Joe Rogans of the left you manage to cobble together. The long and short of it is, you cannot podcast your way out of this. Thanks for watching. Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, give it a like. Leave lots of comments. Algorithm done. Subscribe. Share with friends. Share with your mum and your dad and your cousin and your chickens. I am unfortunately quite poor. Give me money. I need at least £2,000 from you, specifically, who, I'm assuming if you're hearing this message, you have money that I should have. Give it to me on PayPal or Coffee. The links are below, as always. Or, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of each video, get access to members-only Discord, friend code from Nintendo, content that's exclusive, you can sign up to my Patreon or YouTube memberships. That's all good. And you'll get those benefits that I already read out. And get your name read out at the end of this video. Your name could be here. What is your name? Let's just guess. John? That's a pretty common name. Your name here, John. Okay. Everyone else who I love more than you, John, because you haven't paid me yet, is LFR, Ahmad bin Motaradzi, Taylor Wood, Trikoi, Ariella, Hannah, Proguar, Robin Thomas, Emily Eisenberg, Kathy, 1410, It, She, Danielle Van Hamelin, Big Lil Boat, George Geddes, Kira B, No Sparkling Heart, Corey, Gianna J, Mighty Than the Sword, Carolyn, Imogen Q, Luciano Frias Andrade, Adam, Harry, Ender191, Cav, Quesadilla, the Tortilla, Azul, Leron, Adam Lees, Danielle Nevels, No Not That Paul, MB, Wandering Wonder, Lex Phoenix, Enter Crozits, Mira D, Jade Senior, Boa Ea, James W, Marva and Or, Thorngill, Bob the Builder, 5445554, Deborah Boone, Vegas, Azul Zathanium, Vince Whitaker, Emilio Lissette, Jason Haig, Franklin McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Alec Gill, John N, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Dagan, Robin Podolsky, Nightlight, Plushy, Jesus, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philippa Tabrogga, Sober Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, PJ Lisbrel, Howard Lott, Narania, Scarjan, Melissa Allen, Butt Burglar, Atoxis Builds Things, Sarah Francesca Smith, and Rachel. Love you all. Do the Joe... don't do the Joe Rogan. Oh, good God, don't do the fucking Joe Rogan. You could be the Joe Rogan of the left by having a 4-hour podcast where you just listen to a bunch of people who you don't understand and nod and say, wow, that's amazing. You could do that. Apparently it earns millions. So you just need the name recognition of someone who was a martial arts commentator and also the host of Fear Factor. I imagine that's the hard part, getting on Fear Factor, given I think it's been cancelled. Is Fear Factor cancelled? I'm not going to look that up. I just imagine it's cancelled. Anyway, do it. Replace him because I think he sucks. And you are great, John. Okay. Adios. Have a lovely day and life. Bye.